Being an artist and making art has become such an integral part of who I am as a person and how I interact with the world. That it just is, it's a huge part of my life, and I can't imagine functioning on a day-to-day basis without the ability for me to come out here into my studio and process the world every day. I mean, there are very few days that I'm not out here starting a new painting or doing something. If I'm not painting, I'm, doing some marketing or looking for inspirations, taking photographs. I wouldn't say it envelops me or anything like that. I just think it's just become like an appendage to who I am. And I can't imagine being anything other than an artist. And it makes me incredibly happy to be able to share that part of myself with the world.
The first graffiti that I ever photographed was on my first trip to Paris for my 50th birthday. And I stumbled on a graffiti of interlocked faces next to the Pompidou Center and photographed it. It was on film, so had no idea what kind of image I had until I got home and had the images developed and started printing and became enamored of the street art from that point on. And in subsequent travels, I began to look for images on the street that were interesting and maybe had significance, or maybe was just a random collaboration of different people posting their art or painting their images on top of each other.
I first saw Claudia's work at her restaurant in Manchester, and I was so struck by it, and I really couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was about it that just really inspired me and excited me. And weeks went by, and I couldn't stop thinking about Claudia's photography of graffiti that she had taken. And then, I don't know, one morning out of the blue, it dawned on me what it was that really struck me. And it was the collaboration, the layer and layer and layer of collaboration between artists, unbeknownst to one another. And then Claudia comes along and she takes her photographs and, her composition, the colors, the lighting, all of it is another layer of collaboration. And I just thought, wouldn't it be wonderful if Claudia and I could somehow do an exhibition together? And then I started thinking, how could that work? And the idea of call and response sort of came to me, that I would respond to her graffiti photographs. And I reached out to her and we were off to the races.
Finding graffiti is usually a random occurrence when I travel. And I know now that certain cities have, some cities have some pretty incredible street art. Amsterdam is one that's amazing, probably the most interesting and prolific and long-term pieces of graffiti is in Prague on the it's a wall that people, even when they were under communist control, they were able to go and express themselves. And the wall has been there for 20 years or probably more. I visited it over 3 times over a 12-year period, and some of the work will still be there, and other bits have been totally covered. And the wall itself centers on the Beatles, John Lennon. You find many references to their music. And, so that has been a favorite place to photograph. In the 2000s, there was a very common thread of people working in studios, printing on paper in some fashion, and then going out and wheat pasting their work onto the walls, more so than you'd find people that actually were able to, under cover of darkness, get out and paint on the walls, although Banksy is a exception to that, because his work is actually done in place, I believe, most of it. So there was, during the travels, most of the graffiti that I've shot was that style of graffiti. What you find now more is just a lot of tagging and people's initials and people's names, which is definitely not interesting. And I find there's been less and less graffiti to photograph, either from lack of interesting graffiti or that the authorities have cleaned up everything to the point there's not much left.
When I think about process and I have to describe the way that I work, I would say that I work completely intuitively. There typically is not a plan. I'll walk out into the studio with an urge or something, or a feeling that I want to process, maybe a message that I want to get out into the world, that maybe I'll write it on the canvas, but then I'll paint over it. Something like that. The difference working on call and response was that I was working with specific photographs. And so my paintings had to relate to those photographs. So it disciplined me. It disciplined me in a good way because it kept me moving forward. I didn't have many moments where I felt stuck because I had basically been fed the color palette through the photograph, and the work was really internal on my part to then express what I felt intuitively from these photographs. And these photographs were such a menagerie of collaboration between artists, and I thought a lot about what they were feeling and thinking and why, all of those things, what they emotions it brought up for me through their collaboration. And then of course Claudia's her composition of the work. And I know that Claudia and I spoke a bit about these graffitis. Now some of them don't even exist anymore. So that was always in the back of my mind too. Like, these are time capsules of moments in time, because a lot of these don't exist anymore. And all of those layers went into my process, which are things that typically don't exist in my process. But it was really a great experience, and I enjoyed it 100% thoroughly and would do it again.
What does photography mean to me? I am a very visual person. I can't draw, can't paint. So it's a way for me to express myself and pull out what I see and what I feel about things, and share it with other people without having to pick up a pencil and try to draw. Sometimes I find that I don't really experience situations in so directly as much as I want to pull out my camera and experience through the camera, and I'm looking at things in relation to other elements in the same frame. And especially going to museums, I feel like I don't necessarily experience the art directly as much as wanting to have my camera out and photograph relationships with people, looking at the images, and the images in their setting as much as experiencing the art as the artist probably would have appreciated my doing so.
Color played a major role in the collaboration between Claudia and I, because I knew that these pieces that I was painting in response to her work had to relate in some way to her photographs. Not to mimic them or recreate them in any way, but they had to be from my intuition, my heart, if you will, my soul. I had to respond to these paintings in a way that they had a relationship, and I did that through color. And I think that you'll see that in all the pieces in Call and Response, that there is the relationship, the thread that holds them together is the color that I chose to make them relate to one another, to talk to one another. But I also knew that they also have to stand on their own. They can't depend on one another. Each painting has to stand on its own merit, as well as having a relationship with Claudia's work. So I feel like I've done that successfully, and I love the pairings. I love the exhibit, and I've certainly loved working with Claudia.
What I really like about how the pieces that are the response to the graffiti photos is that it pulls out elements without being literal, and I think it adds another dimension to the graffiti, especially when they're hanging right next to each other. It highlights things in the graffiti that you might not have noticed.
Yeah, I remember when we first started talking about the pictures, the photographs we were going to use, and I remember one conversation, and I think I asked you something about them, about like where they were taken or whatever, and then I made you stop because I wanted to just have like a pure impression of my own without any knowledge of where it came from or what it meant to you. I wanted it just to be my response to it.
Did a really amazing job of drawing other meanings out of the photographs, and now it makes me look at the photographs a little bit differently. And your paintings evoke a whole different response, and it's just, to me, all based on the color and the random marks that are in the paintings. And it's just really happy circumstance that they meld so well together.
Yeah, they do. And, like with your photographs, it's just, I think for me, it's the way that you captured them and the way that you composed the photograph. A lot of them, like the warthog and the meerkat, and all of them are just, they just make me smile. They make me happy, and it's just interesting that there was all the collaborations that came before, and then there's ours.